Okay, good afternoon. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon for our joint webinar on Love the Resume You're With, preparing you for the conference and hiring seasons. My name is Meghan Godorov, and I am a career coach and speaker who has had quite so many years of experience in higher education, but also in partnering with Spelman Johnson to support the development of all of you, mostly our mid to executive level professionals in the field, but quite a handful of our entry level folks as well. So we are so very pleased to be able to provide you today with this webinar about resumes, because we know that this is one of the biggest hurdles that we have to get over when we are applying for jobs and thinking about who we are and what we bring to the table when we're considering our next steps in our careers. So again, we are super excited to be able to share this with you. And without further ado, I'm going to mute all the participants. You will have the option to share a comment or a question in the chat box. So feel free to do that at your leisure. We will get to questions along the way, as well as have some time at the end of the webinar for this. All right. So a little bit about me. I know I shared a little bit just now, but I wanted to give you some background. I have about over 10 years of experience in higher education, and my focus has mostly been on career and talent development. I spent a good number of years working in a career development center, and then also really helping companies grow and help individuals grow when it comes to their brand development and their understanding of what resumes really should look like in our field. And so I've probably seen over 1,000 resumes at this time, just alone when it comes to executive level resumes. But then again, beyond that, when you include all resumes that I've ever seen. So I have quite the amount of experience and just want to share forth with you some best practices when it comes to how a resume should look and what the content should be in there. So as an overview for the agenda, we're going to talk about some structural tips, review what a typical resume could look like in higher ed, give you some options for categories, talk a little bit through the content, how to quantify, how to qualify your experience, and really make sure that you're bringing forth the kinds of information that are going to be most relevant and most pertinent to the positions for which you're applying. We'll also talk a little bit about strategies when it comes to resumes. I always say to individuals, whether it be my clients or other folks I'm working with, my friends even, really the resume is the first chance that somebody has to look at you and understand who you are. And, usually the second is a cover letter. But I've also heard people say, there's 50% of the people look at the resume first and 50% of the people look at the cover letter first. So we really want to be thinking about this document as a way to capture who you are and what you're about. So we'll talk a little bit about that strategy. And then, like I said before, we will offer an opportunity for a question and answer. So let's just get right into it. We all know that our time is precious here, so I want to make sure that you get the most out of this. There will be a document that we will provide you at the end of the webinar that will actually give you sort of this general template that I actually have described in these slides here today. So don't feel the need to scribble everything down. Just kind of listen in and think about your own resume. Maybe even have it next to you or bring it up on the computer so you can start to compare a little bit about what I'm saying for each of the different categories and the structural tips that I'm providing. So this is what, the beginning of a resume might look like. And again, I've neutralized it so that we can all sort of be on the same page about what's best practice. I am a huge fan of people feeling like they can individualize it in some way, but we want to do that within reason. So let's go through each of the categories, each of the sections, let's say, and I'll talk through some of the tips for that. So your header should be pretty simple: your name, your physical address, email address, phone number, and LinkedIn URL. I see so often that people remove or do not include the LinkedIn URL. And that's really an option for you to add additional information to what your resume is. On your LinkedIn, you can talk about or have media, so articles or publications or other things that might add a little bit more color to your resume. The piece about the address, I would say, if you are searching for something where you currently are, an address can be really helpful in terms of showcasing allegiance to or familiarity with the region. If you are applying elsewhere, maybe the physical address isn't as important because you might be more flexible in terms of where you would like to go. And that can all be addressed in the cover letter. The next category, right away, you'll see professional experience. Now, some of you might be thinking, why is there not a professional summary there or summary of qualifications? Really, quite honestly, higher ed folks don't necessarily care about that category heading, because oftentimes it's really repetitive to what you might say in a cover letter. Here are the reasons why, or a summary of my experiences. And oftentimes too, people just use basic phrases like, 10 years of experience in higher education with a focus on leadership development, for example. Or they'll say, highly skilled individual with 20 years of experience in higher ed. Well, it's just too generalized to really be that powerful. So instead of, kind of pushing people's focus down further into the resume, trying to get past that summary, let's just start with what's most relevant to them. They want to know where you've worked, what you've done, and what your accomplishments are. So for the first category, like I said, professional experience is probably the most neutral category heading. Some people put relevant experience, because you may have multiple categories and you want to separate out some of your higher ed experience in career development versus community development, because you're looking for a couple different jobs and you want to make sure that you can flip-flop those experiences within the category heading. So it really points the employer to a type of thing they should be thinking about. Within this category, you can include paid, unpaid positions, assistantships, fellowships, research, teaching experience, or you could break it down like I just said. So you can have a professional experience category, you can have teaching experience, and then presentations, publications. So I'm giving you the option here because I want you to be able to think about it from your own perspective. What do I really want to get out of this? So here's a couple of, key points about how it's going to look when you're describing your experience. So I'm going to focus on one that I think is really the most effective way of organizing the information about your positions. And Spelman Johnson and I work on this very closely in suggesting that this is the best way of going about this. It doesn't mean that you can't do it other ways, but we really want to encourage you to consider a format that looks similar to this. So you would include a position title, the institution's name, the city, state where it is, and also the date that you have been working there. Now, the other piece to this is that you would want to include an institutional description. So you might have worked at many different types of institutions. Well, not everybody is familiar with what that institution is. Franklin and Marshall College, where I went to undergrad, is a very different type of institution than, let's say, Kutztown University, which is a mid-sized state school. I've worked in a liberal arts setting. I've worked, for companies that are external to higher ed, but facilitate, growth in higher ed. So describing each of those experiences can really shed light on the variety of work that you've done and the richness of the work that you've done. So a hint here really is to use the institutional description that you might get from the first couple sentences on their Wikipedia page. It's usually very simple. They give you the size of the institution, the types of things they're noted for, and also the type. So liberal arts, private, 2-year, 4-year, religious affiliation, anything like that. And then you'll see below that there are 2 category headings, an accomplishments section and a responsibilities section. I have seen so many resumes that just list everything that you've ever done in bulleted points, and it goes on for pages. Nobody's really going to read that. They need to be able to be pointing, you need them to be pointed to what you want them to know most. And quite honestly, what's going to differentiate you is the section around accomplishments, because you really want them to see, okay, what impact did I make here? What is it that I've done that's going to make me stand out from everybody else? So, for the most part, I'm using my experiences mostly, career counselor. Most people that are in that field know what a career counselor has done. So we can include the basic responsibilities in a category that's below all the accomplishments that I've had. So it's really nice to be able to split those up and to be able to showcase what you've really learned or earned from that experience and what what impact you've had on that organization, as opposed to just saying, I've just basically seen, 1,000 students in a week and, go from there. The other piece here that I will mention before I go back to a slight alternative structure, below where it says bulleted point best practices, we really want you to begin with dynamic words. So that means action verbs, not responsible for, ... responsible for doesn't really help me much. You might be responsible for it, but did you really do it? I think that's sort of from a language perspective, we can kind of point to it that way. But what I want you to do is really think about, okay, did I, conduct assessments? How many assessments did I conduct? Did I manage folks? If I say manage, that's great. Instead of saying responsible for so many people, well, what does that really mean? So breaking it down a little bit more and using those action verbs to really be, to be able to showcase like the action that you took is really important. So the other note here on that second bulleted point, using past tense for former positions and current for those you still hold. I see this all the time where people use managed or, the past tense verb for the current experiences and then present verbs for other ones. I think it's just a matter of, fine tuning and updating and making sure that you've put the past experiences in the past tense. The other thing I see a lot is adding like an S at the end, so manages or works or collaborates. That form of the verb is really not necessary. You just want to do collaborate, manage, I guess you could say coordinate. There's so many different words to use, but, remove the S, add on the D for past tense, but remove the S for present tense. And then we'll talk a little bit more about quantifying and qualifying in the next couple examples. So again, if you have any questions around this, feel free to insert that into the question or the chat box, and we will get to those questions a little bit later. So the other piece I want to show you here is the similar piece of how it would go if you were to insert your experiences into that similar category. So you'll see here that I copied and pasted the same format from the previous slide into the same slide, but then put information about my experience right here. So I put my title, the name of my company, where I am located, and then the time that I've been doing it. And underneath that, I have my accomplishments and my responsibilities after I've shared a little bit about what the company is. I'm trying to show you differences in structure and format and italicize and bold. So you can choose whatever you'd like. If you want to italicize accomplishments and responsibilities as subcategory headings, that's fine. Just be consistent. If you want to always bold the title or bold and italicize the title of your position, feel free to do that. It's really up to you, but I just want to reinforce that it's all about consistency. And play around. I mean, there's different things that look good to different people. So as long as it's readable and easy to digest in terms of its content, you should be fine either way. Before I go on, I want to just make one more note. So the alternative to this, which I actually have shown in the resume template that I will send, I promised to send you all after the session, is that you organize your institution name. So you put the institution name first, make it flush with the left margin, and then put the location, so the city, state, and then the entire date of the experience that you've had there. So let's say I've been working at this company, but I've had multiple positions within this company. I would say, let's say administrative assistant, then I'll say counselor, and then I would say director, and so these three positions would be under that. I'd want to organize it so that the organization's name is first, the description of that organization is there, and then I would put each of the titles of the position. So career coach and speaker would go underneath the description of the company here, and then I would put accomplishments and responsibilities for each of those positions following. And I would lastly break down the time frame in which I've done those experiences on the right side with the dates. So it would be January 2013 to present for the entire time I've done it. But let's say, I was working in this organization and only really in my current position for about 6 months or a year, I would put, February 2017 to present. And then everything else would be backtracked from there within that time frame. So again, I've showed that to you in the example in the template, but if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to help. And then you'll notice at the very top that I've put my name in there, I've put my address, my email, phone, and LinkedIn. Pick one email, pick one phone number. You're going to confuse the employer. Well, who do I contact? Do I contact them on their email? Do I contact them? Which email do I which phone do I contact them on? So just keep it simple for them. And then the last thing I'll note here is that when you're structuring your resume, I've seen a lot of folks that have the widest margins that are possible. And you have like a 7-page resume. Well, think about it. Is the employer going to really get to that last page? possibly, they possibly would, but you can have your margins as small as narrow or 0.5 all the way around the document. And your font doesn't have to be like super huge. Your name can be 16-point font and your address could be, let's say, 12 or 11. And then your headings could be, 1 point higher than the rest of your document content, which, professional experience, for example, might be 12-point font. And then position title, accomplishments, and all the bulleted points could be 11-point font. So just think about that as an option, option 2. And in the template I've given you also just those basic suggestions, along with some suggestions for types of font that you should use that aren't really overly memorable in a way that would be bad. So this is another category heading, which I shared with you earlier. There's many options. Sometimes people just say relevant experience and additional experience. Others say professional experience, and then list others that are more specific, like professional development, presentations, publications, etc., volunteer. Another one that's popular is university service. So those are all kind of listed right in there under that additional experience category. The same rules apply to the position title, organization name, etc., the way that you've organized it in the professional experience category. So again, consistency is really critical. And I've said that already about other things related to the resume, but I'll say it again now. If you pick a format, stick with the format, no matter what the category is. So I've tried to show that example here once again. Here I've chosen to just show it slightly different in terms of the style in which I've shared, around the title or the organization name or the date. So you'll notice under professional associations and memberships, it says President, Northeast Region 2 for NASPA without a location, because quite honestly, it doesn't quite matter for that. And then the date. So you see all of that is bolded, even the date, and there are parentheses around the date. But in a lower experience, when it comes to professional associations and memberships, as a different category, I have everything not bolded. So again, decide what sticks out. I mean, if you really want the institution title to stick out, make that bold. If you want the position title to stick out, make that bold or bold in italics. Again, fiddle around with what works for you. And you'll also see that the dates for the second professional associations and memberships category example don't have parentheses around them. So, it's up to you really how you want to go about it. But I just wanted to give you a few different things to look at, because I think it's really important to give you some options. And again, to as plainly as possible, lay this all out, because, it's really you that are going to be able to do it on your side. And I want you to be empowered to be able to do that. I'll also make note of just the middle section there under professional associations and memberships, where it says NASPA - Student Affairs Administrators in Higher Ed. So what I did was flip the format, just like I had suggested earlier under professional experience, that if instead you wanted to highlight the organization and you had multiple positions within an organization, you could organize it like this. So you would put the title of the organization or institution, the date, and then you put your title and then describe everything. For additional experiences, category headings, and professional associations and memberships position descriptions, I don't really think that it's necessary to have accomplishments and responsibilities. What you really want to do there is to just give them the hard-hitting facts. If you've accomplished so many things, like you help to increase the number of attendees at an annual conference as a part of your role in a conference planning committee, then that's what you include. Don't say that you've, been on 20 calls, in the entire time that you've worked there. I mean, that's not as important as what impact you made and what you did as a group and contributing into that group. So that's what I share there. Again, if you have questions or other thoughts on any of this, feel free to post them into the Q&A, and we will get to them in a little bit. So just moving through each of the category headings. There is another piece of this with presentations and publications that I want to call out to. many times I receive a resume or even a CV, because a lot of the folks that I work with or that come to us through Spelman Johnson have a long list of publications and presentations and other things that they really need to be putting into APA format that are not in APA format. And it's really important to adhere to the guidelines of our profession by putting them into an APA structure. So I've put an example here for both a publication and a presentation. It's important to list them in reverse chronological order, the most present to most past. And here I've just given a simple example, selected publications and presentations. You don't have to put every one of them, but if you want to put everyone, that's also fine. You just note that it's going to take up a lot more space on your resume, and make sure that you're front loading a lot of the most relevant types of experiences in the beginning of your resume. So this may come back later because it's important for them to know that you've done this work, especially if you have earned your PhD or are doing your PhD at this point in time. So I've given a couple of examples. Again, this will be available to you not only in the presentation, but also in the template. So again, it's really important to format it this way. I found that, the book that we received in grad school around APA formatting, totally fine to use. The other updated website that I seem to refer to a lot more often is the Purdue OWL, so Purdue OWL style guide for APA formatting, and I find it to be really helpful. So that's something that you want to consider. Feel free to go forth and do that. Okay. So the format for an education section. Now, I realize that many of you have multiple degrees. So I've tried to include an example of some multiple degrees here. Simple format, name of college and university, the city and the state, and the graduation year with the month. The degree below that, and again, the degree can be italicized, bold and italicized, whatever you'd like, but just, again, be consistent with that formatting. Listing all the majors, minors, any concentrations that are applicable. I don't really think that GPA is that important, especially if you're a seasoned professional, mid-career executive level, career level, they don't care about the GPA. They care about, anything else that you've done beyond that. I know it's a feather in your cap, so I'm not saying that it's not important, but it just may not be that critical for an application process at this point. Now, if you're applying for fellowships or scholarships or other things and they require it, certainly list it on the resume, but it's not really required for a job application. So you'll see, again, the example here, Kutztown University of Pennsylvania with the city and state, and then the date, and then the degree. And I've done the same thing, but, slightly different format. Franklin Marshall College bolded, city, state not bolded, the date not bolded again, and then the title of the degree not bolded. So it's configurable. You can configure it however you'd like, but just making sure that you have some things to look at. And then the other piece here, there's two options. Some folks decide that they want to put honors and awards within their education section, make it like a subcategory like we do with the accomplishments and responsibilities. Others like to make it separate. So it's really up to you. And, I think that anybody is really happy to work with you in considering what it is that, works best for you. But, it can be anything from scholarships, grants, inductions, awards through professional associations. If you can describe the award, because maybe it's not as obvious what it is, that can be helpful. So you might say, 40 under 40 awardee, for significant accomplishments both in professional field and the community, so that they know what that is, because not everybody knows what a 40 under 40 award is. So just think about those things. It usually can fit, within that same line that you might describe, that you might say the award name, and then you can make that italicized with plain text, and it usually fits right in there. So the other option for people with the education section is that they will include trainings or professional development, certifications, seminars, things like that. So it's up to you. If you have a significant number of those, you can always put them in a separate category, take it out of education altogether. A lot of these certifications or professional development opportunities can really make a difference in your application, because you're dedicated to continuing to develop, and it's nice to call attention to that. This is one of those examples. So certifications and skills. I have several certifications. I always want to list them. They're important to me, not only personally, but also professionally. I want the individuals that I'm working with to know that straight out. I've also included some skills, and skills are debatable. If you're putting like Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and basics, I mean that's a given. But if there's something that happened, you helped roll out a program on your campus or software, you're taking other development courses, around coding, for example, and that's something very different than what others in your position or with your background might be doing, then I would list those. And so it's really up to you how you want to go about it. I have here, 3 different functions. You notice I'm not listing Microsoft Word or things like that, the basics. I'm listing some of those others that, people may not actually be familiar with. And then here's another example of professional development. So I listed the same thing as I did before, if I were to look back at my professional experience or additional experience categories, I've structured it as such that it is the title, the organization name or the institution name, and the location, as well as the date. And then I put one bulleted point here just to describe it. But, again, for something like this, you're not necessarily going to have an accomplishment. It's going to be about what you did there. So that's sort of the exception to the accomplishments rule. But again, it might be helpful to describe because not everybody's familiar with what the Women's Leadership Institute might be. So making sure to clarify any of those misconceptions is really helpful. So I want to talk about quantifying and qualifying your experiences. And you'll see I pulled out some examples from my own resume. It's so funny because as I was looking at my resume, I thought, wow, I need to update this because it's not, I'm trying to practice what I preach as much as possible, but there's some tweaks that I could do even to my own descriptions that it was really important for me to be able to look back at and to say to you all, knowing that it's a work in progress. These resumes are living, breathing documents, and you need to spend time doing it consistently. And I know with our busy schedules and our jobs, it can be difficult to keep up with it. But you're taking the time today, which is huge, and I so applaud you for doing that because it's really important to be able to take stock of where you're at and what you're doing and what you want, and to make sure that this document is ready to go. And especially to do that in the first quarter of the the academic or the calendar year is also really helpful. But it's, like I said, going to set you up for this next quarter when we launch into conference season. So let's talk through what this looks like. And I want to just take a step back and pause. Feel free to take a deep breath. Feel free to take a sip of your water. Look at your resume one more time. Provide us with any questions that you might have. Because what I want to do next is to do this, and I need you to be able to participate, even if you're not going to be saying it out loud to me. I want you to be able to think through it on your own and come up with the answers as an active participant in this process. So I'm going to take a sip of water myself, and then we'll get started. Okay, so what does quantifying and qualifying mean? So quantifying means that you are providing numbers. That might mean percentages of increasing, percentages of engagement, number of students that you work with a day, number of programs that you've delivered. Anything that you can quantify, we want to be able to include in terms of a number. Now, I know some of you might be panicking thinking, I don't keep track of that kind of stuff. Maybe your offices do, maybe your departments do, maybe your colleagues do in some way. So as a homework or as a to-do, you might want to just double check, have I been keeping track? And in what ways might I be able to keep track of the impact that I'm making? Ask around and be sure that works for you. But again, we're going to practice a little bit of this. So this is an example. Yep, this is an example of what I think of to be a pretty comprehensive bulleted point. So it starts with an action verb. It's clearly in the present tense. This is something related to my current business. I've quantified it. I've said what the workshops are. They're both virtual and they're in person. And I've also shared the kinds of topics that I've given presentations on. The last piece is also important too. It's also impact. So how many individuals have I actually reached? So it wasn't just enough for me to say, 20 workshops. it's also important for me to say how many people that really reached, because 5 people could attend a workshop. That means something, right, to those 5 people. But if I'm trying to think about scope, it can be helpful to talk about how many people I've reached. So this happens a lot with the folks that are in, more on the student affairs side, but more specifically in student activities, for example. You'll say that you run workshops however many a year, but you don't really tell me how many people did you reach. When I was in grad school, every year we did a block party for the Kutztown community, and it was students and anybody in the community. We invited people from outside of the Kutztown area to come join us for this free festival, that lasted all day long. And at one point we were like, how do we quantify the number of people that we had? So we partnered with the local organization, the local community engagement organization, and ended up figuring out how to come up with the number of people that we reached. And based on that, I was able to include that number into my figure and into my resume. So it's not enough just to say that you did this block party and it went fabulously. It's how many people did I reach, and how many community, what's the community impact, both for the students and for the general public. So hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of what you have to think about when you're creating or crafting a bulleted point. So just as a review, we start with an action verb. It's in the present tense because it's a present tense experience. We talk about what it is that we are doing. So creating workshops, delivering workshops, and what types of workshops they are and how many there are. So over 20, both virtually and in person. And then what they're really focused on. So what the topics were. Again, adding more color and adding more description to what I'm actually saying here. And then how many people I've really reached. So what is the scope? So let's take a look at this one together. Now this one is really very generalized. So I'm going to be very honest with you and upfront at this point. So this bulleted point, and I found this in my resume the other day. So, I am being totally honest here that this needs help. And again, it's just the way it is. Sometimes we get caught up in just getting something down on the paper, but not really thinking critically about what it's actually saying. So here it's write blog posts focusing on candidate development and key issues in the higher education recruiting process. Also note here that I'm not using many articles. So I'm not saying issues in the higher education recruiting process, not using the, I took that out. So the's and a's and all that kind of stuff, it's really a bulleted phrase. It's not even a bulleted sentence. So in this case, I maybe shouldn't even have the period. I will give you the option that if you want periods at the end, go ahead, but just be consistent with that. And I would also encourage you to not use them at all in that sense, because it's, again, not a full sentence. So food for thought there. So for this one, what might you do? Just take a moment to think about it. Based on what I shared with you in the last bulleted point, how might you edit this? We're not going to do a chat feature to have the discussion just based on timing, but I want you to think about what you might do. And then I'll share a little bit forward about, how I would edit it myself. So I'll give you just a minute to think about it. Okay, so let's think about what this would look like. Write blog posts. So let's start there. Well, I want to know how many blog posts, and what topics are they on? I could be writing 2 blog posts in a year, or I could be writing 2 blog posts a week. That's very different in terms of how much time it takes, what impact you're making on the folks that are reading it, what you're contributing to the organization as a whole. And so it's really important to quantify there. And in that case, qualify. So I write 1 to 2 blog posts a quarter on topics related to, again, candidate development, right? But what does that mean? So on promoting and advancing in the field, or maybe talking about resume development and cover letter writing topics, maybe also announcing individual placements in different positions. There's so many different things that I can include there. So making sure to just take that step back and to consider, okay, what am I really writing about, and how often am I writing? And maybe even going back. So in this case, I should go back to Spelman Johnson and I should say, okay, on the blog post that I wrote, do you have any statistics that would showcase how many people are reading the blog post? So they might say, yeah, you have an average of 20, I don't know, I'm just making this up, right? 20 visits, per day on this blog post, or 20 visits in that first week. That would be pretty low, right? Maybe 500, in the first month that it was posted. And so that gives you a better sense for like, okay, who's reading and why are they reading it? Maybe, you can track times of the year that all that's taking place and what people are most excited about. So again, just finding ways to quantify, really, really important. So hopefully that made sense to everyone. Again, if it's not making sense, feel free to ask questions. We'll get to them at the end. Here's another example. Conduct research and interviews in pursuit of business and candidate development opportunities across the academy. So really, what does that mean? Like if I read it out loud, I kind of know what it means because I'm writing it, but if I read it and I was an employer, how would I interpret that? So conduct research and interviews in pursuit of business and candidate development opportunities. So maybe what I'm really trying to say is threefold or twofold, and I need to break it down into a couple different bulleted points. Or maybe, it's pretty good in terms of what it's trying to convey, but I need to quantify it differently. So take a little bit of time to think about what you might do to edit that. I know it's kind of difficult because it's not your specific bulleted point, but if you were to apply the same concepts as to what we're talking about, maybe take a look at this or take a look at your own bulleted point and see, like that was a little bit more generalized. I should probably be considering it differently. So I'll give you a little bit of time just to consider this bulleted point. And if other questions arise, feel free to insert that comment into the chat box. So for me, in this case, when it comes to conducting research and interviews, it's really about conducting research and interviews with mid-level professionals, because we want to know what you care about, what your struggles are, what your challenges are, what your pain points are. We want to be able to support you in the ways that matter, because really, we've spent a lot of time working with executive level folks, and we've helped to coach them through. And really the mid-level and entry-level folks need to know what's to come. And so if we can get a better sense for what that looks like, that was the charge in this way, then we'll be able to better serve you. And that's, again, one of the reasons why we're sharing this with you today around resumes, because we want you to be successful. But that's what I need to include in this bulleted point, because it's going to add purpose to what I'm sharing here in this bulleted point. And it's going to resonate with the employer, like, wow, they're really aligning with each other to advance the goals of the company and to leverage an expertise and an interest of this consultant, meaning me, in making this move forward. So you might be able to also add, or I might be able to also add, how many hours I've spent on research, how many interviews I've done so far, and maybe what functional areas we've focused on. Because maybe it's not completely across the academy. Maybe it's only really within a couple of functional areas to be specific. So wanting to be able to share that, I think that's a really important point. So I'm paying attention to time here. We're at 20 of 4, and I have a couple more examples here, but I want to be able to kind of do my final reminders and then give you an opportunity to answer or ask questions, and maybe give you a little bit of buffer time in between meetings, because I'm sure that you all have done meetings back to back like we typically do. But I want to kind of put you at ease that you again will get a PDF version of these slides, so you'll have it to refer to later. You can always think through these examples based on the structure, the format that I've shared with you today about quantifying and qualifying and adding more details to the bulleted points that you have. So that way you don't have to worry about, losing that practice moment if you want to go back to it. But I really want to make sure that we get to your questions. So let me just share with you some final reminders, so that you walk away with every piece of information that I feel like is really important at this stage. Knowing that some of you have some really fabulous resumes already, maybe you just need some minor tweaks. Some of you also may need a little bit more of some heavy lifting on that. We're here to support you, so feel free, to reach out, or to at least reach out to even just your your institution's career offices, your peers, your colleagues, mentors. They're all here. Multiple eyes on your resumes can always be helpful. So again, final reminders. No templates. Absolutely no templates. It messes with the formatting, it messes with the structure. Everything I've given you today in terms of the example structures are all just done with, basic Word documents, spacing and tabs and enter and all that stuff. So you don't need the templates to get a clean looking resume and one that stands out. Not everybody is huge into using color or borders, but I think that sometimes not like a border of the entire document, but lines in between sections to kind of make it easy for people to see. And usually there's a color option there, or even if it's just a little bit gray. Most people print resumes in black and white anyway, so the color doesn't really matter unless they're pulling it up on their computer. But I want to make sure that I note that templates really just are too difficult to deal with. They can get messed up in the formatting and in sending around to different applications. So I just say avoid it to avoid any of that confusion taking place. As I said earlier, professional summary is not needed. In fact, it is discouraged. And I would prefer that you push all of your most relevant experience up to the top of the resume so they see that first, and they can then start digging into who you are and what you're all about. I mentioned the margins not being any larger or any smaller than 0.5 or narrow all the way around the document. This will ensure that you have a number of pages that's reasonable based on the amount of experience that you have. And that's the other thing too about number of pages. 2 pages really is probably going to suffice. Mine is about 3, but it's my master resume. So I've included every possible experience that I've ever had and described it, and I have it saved as a master resume so that I can refer back to that at any time to make updates or edits, and then pull out what I need to make it an actual finalized, tailored document to whatever position I'm applying for, or whatever consultant opportunity I want to pursue, whatever it is that applies to you. So making sure that you have that master resume and then can pull information can be really beneficial. Font size and type does matter. I said that before, where you want to be reasonable with how much different your name size font is versus your category headings versus your actual content and bulleted description. So play with that, but don't get too crazy. It's really distracting if there's a lot of different fonts or a lot of different sizes, or your name screaming at them because it's so huge on the paper. Be mindful of what the experience is of the reader. Save your document as a PDF before you send it, or update it, upload it into a job application. Simple. Put your name at the top, say resume, and then put the name of the position you're applying for. I've also put the name of the institution. It just makes it so much easier for people to find it and know that it's yours and not have to search around. So if you save it as a PDF, none of the formatting will get messed up. It'll all look the same as it should. And then the other piece of that too is always take a look at it before you do send it along, so that none of the formatting is off, because sometimes that can happen if your Word document formatting is messy. We talked already about quantifying and qualifying. No references attached. I cannot stress how many times somebody has included a references list. It is not necessary on a resume. Please remove it. Don't even put references available upon request on the resume at all. They know that they will be. Oftentimes, even in the search process, Spelman Johnson would attest to this, they're already going to ask you for references anyway, and you'll upload that in a separate document and send it, and that'll be part of the application process. So you don't need to include that separate with the resume. Just have that document already ready for you so that you can refer back to it easily enough when you're wanting to share that forth. And the other thing I'll make note about with references, just because I have you all here, please make sure that your references know that you're applying for positions and what positions you're applying for, and send them your updated materials. I've done reference projects for Spelman Johnson, and there are some people that I call that aren't aware that this individual is applying for a position. And not that they're not willing to say anything, but it's always best practice for you to make them aware of that so that they can be prepared. I said this before, consistency is very important. And we've talked a little bit about borders and lines. There's a function in the Word document. You can put insert, and then you'll see borders and shading, and you'll be able to click on that to update it. If you have questions on that, if you want to know the process, you can always reach out to me. I'm happy to answer how to do it. I might even just take screenshots and share it along with you after the webinar. Okay, so I think we're ready to take questions. I know that Jocelyn is in there. She's joined us and is going to help me with the Q&A. So let me Let me get out of this sharing so that I can go to the Q&A space so I can see what you have all asked. Okay. So I think that the first question, maybe Jocelyn, you typed this to me. It said, somebody has said, I read that physical mailing addresses are unnecessary to include these days. Do I agree? So I said a little bit earlier that it's not really necessary if you're not location bound. If you're trying to show affiliation with a particular location, then I would put it because it's not going to hurt. If you don't want an actual address listed, like, the number and the road, you could just put, like where I am, I could put Allentown, Pennsylvania, or I could put Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or if you're out in the West Coast, you could put San Diego, California, like whatever works. I mean, it's helpful to show affiliation with a location if you're specifically looking there. But if you're not, it's fine to remove it. Okay, next question. At what time do you feel it is okay to remove graduate experience, internships, assistantships, etc.? Awesome question. So I now have about, 7 years removed from my graduate school experience. That's from graduation time. So I do not include them, and I stopped including them after the experience that I've collected beyond that trumped the experience of the internship or the assistantship. And I say that because, for example, I interned at Muhlenberg College when I was in undergrad in the Career Center. So any experience that I got after that at my role at Mount Holyoke College in their Career Development Center was way over and beyond what I had there. So if you want to show consistency of experience, like consistency of affiliation with a functional area, I would include it, but not describe it, because honestly, they're going to know what it was that you did there. If there's something that you're really, really proud of that you think is going to be, that's going to tie in with what it was that you did or are going to do in a future position. For example, let's say you created this really awesome program at your internship or assistantship, and you haven't done that since, but you know it's important for the role that you're applying to. I would include that position for that reason, but only include that bulleted point. People will understand the fact that you're just showing highlights of those experiences in the past. It's not like a hard and fast rule that, like, okay, after 5 years, you get rid of it. But I would say, think about it from a position perspective and an employer perspective. Do they really need to know about this experience? Is it okay to just list it or to not include it at all? Because the other thing is, if you put your LinkedIn URL up at the top in your header, they'll be able to go back and look at that experience on that website. And I guarantee you that if it's a high enough level of a position, they're going to be going to check out your digital footprint anyway. So I would say, think about it after 5 years, but also thinking about it in terms of relevancy to the positions you're applying for, and if the experiences that you're gaining are trumping that. Sometimes I've seen, and this is just an additional note, that there's individuals who are applying for like a dean position, and they want to showcase the fact that they've had exposure to a variety of functional areas as they moved up. So including it there, I think, can be really helpful, just because that's showcasing the fact that you see the student's perspective from a variety of vantage points in the academy. Okay, so thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And then the next one. Can a functional resume be used for applying to senior level jobs if you want to focus on transferable skills? Quite frankly, I haven't seen functional resumes used for those types of positions as often as you might expect. It doesn't mean that they're not used. And so I would say that if it's done correctly, you might be able to get away with it. But I think that people are still going to lose you as to what your track was, where you went and why you went there and how long you spent there. And so they're still going to want to see that chronological space. maybe if you're trying to really showcase those senior level positions or the transferable skills or the, the types of, I guess, skills that you are gathering, there's always the option, and I don't know if this happens all the time, but I would say that it's possible to consider to put some of those keywords up at the top, like in your header. Sometimes people use like a headline that says, seasoned technology, this is not related to higher ed, but, seasoned technology leader. And so you kind of have some of those keywords that showcase the skills. It's not unheard of, but I'm just not certain that it would get you any further than a chronological resume would. What I'm actually thinking that was probably a really good idea would be to go back to some of the search associates, and Jocelyn and I can do this actually, and just double check with them to see what they're seeing, if they're seeing a shift, or if the consistency is the chronological. Any time that I've spoken with Ellen Heffernan, who is the owner of Spelman Johnson, we've mostly just focused in on the chronological, and that seems to be the most consistent. So I will see, and we can get back to you all when it comes to that question, if we're hearing something other than what I told you today. Okay. So here's some other questions. These are also great. I'm so happy that you're all here listening to this and have so many questions to ask us. I know that these are super important questions, and it's just so wonderful that, that you've spent the time with us today. We really do appreciate it. So somebody else asked for the education section, why is the name of the institution placed first? You would think that the degree is more important than the institution. So great question. I would say that if it is important to you to talk about the degree, then you can flip-flop, the order. Again, just be consistent. So if you really want to highlight the degree, then go for it. And it's not going to be bad at all. I've seen it both ways, and I apologize for not actually listening at both ways, but I'm glad that you asked the question, because it is okay to do that. So I would flip-flop it, and then use whatever you'd like, italicize or bold for that, and then use whatever other formatting will kind of not highlight the institution, but will make sure that the degree is highlighted more than the institution. And then another person said, where would you list additional 4-credit academic coursework that was not part of a degree program? Would you list that in education or a different category like professional development? So again, the question, where would you list additional 4-credit academic coursework that was not part of a degree program? Would you list it in education or a different category like professional development? So I think that's a great question. If you are taking it as part of like an organization, so let's say you went on lynda.com, right, and you took a bunch of courses, or you went to another institution but just didn't graduate with a degree there, but you want to showcase the fact that you have those courses, I would list them there if it's towards a credit, towards a certification program or something of the sort. I mean, all that makes sense to have under education because it's more academic in nature. If it's, specific to, if you feel like the courses are more professional development in nature, like leadership development or conceptual for the profession, like it's sponsored by a professional association, for example, that seems more like professional development to me. But if you're taking a course that's more academic in nature, then I would put it under education. And I would make sure that you're listing the governing body of that course, the institution or the program or something like lynda.com as a way to designate the fact that it's there. The other part of that is, you could just list the course name right underneath that, the granting institution or granting body, and then list the dates that you took it. There's probably no need to describe them. You could, but it really depends on what kind of description you'd like to put forth and as it relates to the position you're applying for. So if you have further questions about that, you can always reach out to me, but hopefully that helps at this point. Another question, can you reiterate how you distinguish accomplishments from responsibilities? That's a great question. So accomplishments really focus on impact. So for example, I might say that I initiated the grant application process for the building of a new residential facility on campus. So that's a responsibility, right? Like you are more of accomplishment. So you're talking about the fact that you're initiating something, you are reaching out to a granting organization, working on that particular grant to then make a capital gain, so to speak, or a physical change to a campus. Now, there's probably a little more information that you need there in order to really solidify it. So how much money for the grant did you get? What is the number of beds for that building? And what impact did it make? Maybe from an admission standpoint, you were able to increase admission by 5% or 10% or whatever that was. So that's more of an accomplishment. But maybe the responsibility piece of that would just simply be collaborated with partners across campus to put together a grant application for the funding of a new building on campus. So that's really the action that you took, right? You just collaborated and you worked with somebody and you're showcasing your action around that. But the impact was that you secured it and that you oversaw maybe the building of it, or that you were the lead on the granting piece. And then you talked about what impact actually you had. Other accomplishments that people talk about, really relate to the number of people that they reached, within a program, for example. It's not just a responsibility that you create workshops or deliver workshops, but it's, how did you really affect the institution as a whole or the department as a whole? Hopefully that answers your question. I'm trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head. The main differentiator, I think, as I'm just thinking through the resumes that I've looked at over time, the accomplishments really are more about how you made a change, right? How you moved something forward or how you improved a process. It's not just about, okay, I see 12 students a day for a total of, 7 appointments and I run workshops. It's not as simple as that, right? There's more to be added to it to make sure that you're making changes or adjustments. Okay. Another question, at what point should you move your education section to the bottom of your resume? So if you recently earned a PhD or a master's degree or even your undergrad degree, and you want to highlight that because that's part of the qualification for the position, then I would include it at the top. If it's not really a qualification for the position or you earned it quite some time ago, I would move it to the bottom or close to the bottom. It's really mostly about making sure that you're using the category headings in the way that's going to be most advantageous to you in the application process. So I would say thinking about those two would be good. Okay, and we have 3 more questions. So I'm going to try to do this, and I realize that we might go slightly over time, but I want to be able to share all these with you. So if you wouldn't mind hanging on, or if you'd like to share your questions back later, that is fine. If you also need to log off, we completely understand, and we so very much thank you for joining in today. And we'll definitely be in touch with the slides and the template for the resume that I told you I would share. If you continue to have other questions, you can always reach out to us. And if you do share with us some suggestions for future webinars, you will automatically be entered into a drawing where you can receive a free resume review from me. So I would highly encourage you to provide suggestions and be able to then earn that opportunity to have your resume reviewed for free. Okay, so on to the last couple of questions here. How do you handle gaps in employment? For example, somebody's spouse accepts a new position and then you had to move, so you're searching for a position. That's really explainable through a cover letter. You don't want to make up anything, right, in your resume, but if perhaps you could find a way to do some volunteer work even when you're searching for a job that might be relevant to maybe your position, or just to showcase that you were doing something, right, to contribute in some way to kind of keep yourself engaged in the profession or keep yourself engaged in general, that can help. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, and you're taking on other responsibilities within the household because your spouse is working at different times, I would just explain that away in the cover letter. And it's very easy to do that at the front end by just talking about and expressing your interest in the position you're applying for, and sharing with the committee why it is that there is a gap, or what the situation is. I know that I've had people that have done that, especially in the athletics world. There was actually an individual that was applying for a head coaching position in the area here, and she was doing so because not only was the position open, but because her husband had recently accepted a position close by, and she was hoping for this opportunity, and she explained that in her cover letter and also shared that in the interview. So we really knew the impetus for not only her qualifications for the position, but also the reason why she was applying. So I would say, if you can find some other ways to make some contributions from a volunteer capacity, part-time work, anything that shows that you're still trying to stay engaged, and then you can explain a little bit more in your cover letter. Next question. So this individual said, I worked full-time for 2 years in higher ed before attending grad school. While in grad school, I had an assistantship. If she removes the assistantship, there'll be a gap in my resume. Is it best to remove it and have a gap, or keep the assistantship? She's currently at a director level. So I would say keep it. There's no reason to remove it in that way. As I said earlier, you may not want to describe it in great detail. You may want to just put a couple bulleted points that suggest, here's what I did there that was most important to you as the employer. But generally speaking, I would keep it on. Because again, it's part of your story. It's part of your experience. It's part of what makes you who you are in the field and as a professional. So I wouldn't remove it. If, for example, you were to provide me with a suggestion for what we could do next, I might be able to then look at your resume as part of that and really assess it differently based on what I can see. So don't forget to do that. If you're the person that wrote that, happy to entertain that as an option. But yeah, as a general rule of thumb, I would say don't remove it. And then the last person to answer a question here today is, what's your opinion on the use of graphic resumes when applying in college athletics? So graphic resumes meaning the use of, let's say pictures or other types of, I guess you would say something that's sort of branded to athletics or things like that. If that's incorrect, you can always insert the question into the Q&A, and I can add a little bit more to my answer based on that. But I would say that it really probably is going to be more distracting than it is going to be helpful. And, I say that with caution only because there can be some benefit, like in certain professions, like graphic design or art or other things that are sort of more creative. They can really welcome that. It kind of showcases what you can do and helps you stand out from the crowd a little bit. In athletics, I haven't really seen much of that play out, either way, good or bad. So I'd have to see your resume to really know whether or not it was distracting. If you're talking about like a logo for an institution, it's like not their mascot, but their athletics logo, then it might be just distracting. It's really not going to set you apart. What's going to set you apart is the content and the readability. So if it's really distracting from the readability, then I would say just not worry about it. But I can certainly check in with some of the folks at Spelman Johnson, specifically the folks that lead our athletics practice, because they might be seeing other things. But as I said earlier, the majority of what Ellen and the folks at Spelman Johnson and I agree upon is that less is more in this way. And so being able to ensure that individuals can read your resume in a way that makes sense for them is going to be the most effective. So I know we just went 5 minutes over, but I'm so appreciative of most of you hanging on. This is so wonderful. I have had the pleasure to be able to do this for all of you. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. I really do appreciate it. I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint real quick because, as I said, we want to offer to you the opportunity to submit a suggestion for another topic and get your resume reviewed for free by me. So as a thank you again, please enter that suggestion in the chat box, and we will, reach back out to you to be able to get you that offer. And, just again, a huge thank you to Spelman Johnson for their partnership, both before and continuing forward. They're a wonderful organization, and I'm just so very thankful to be able to share my knowledge with you. As I said before, I've seen a zillion resumes, and I know what's consistently not really necessarily most beneficial to you in the process. And I want you to be able to be prepared for what comes next. So feel free to connect with us. You can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and you can also do the same for Spelman Johnson. We are so very happy to be able to connect with you. And again, if you want to visit our website, feel free to do that. But we look forward to another webinar and look forward to your suggestions. And thank you again for your time.